Good morning. My name is Richard Bernal. I am Professor of Practice at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies and Principal Research Fellow at the P.J. Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy at the Mona campus of UWI. I'm going to be your Master of Ceremonies for this function. It is my great honor to have been asked to chair this function in honor of the launch of a book of writings and speeches of Sir Alister McIntyre. It's going to be a fairly short program, but I hope it will be a substantive one which you will enjoy. Permit me to welcome you here to the regional headquarters of the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica. I would like to acknowledge and recognize all of those who are participating in the program and all of those who are actually present here. In terms of participation in the program, not to get ahead of the schedule, but we will have Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, former Prime Minister of Jamaica. Present with us this morning, I would especially like to recognize Sir Kenneth Hall, former Governor General of Jamaica and formerly of the University of the West Indies. Thank you for being here, sir. I would also like to recognize Professor Ian Boxhill, Deputy Principal of the Mona campus at UWI. Faculty, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome. We have a fairly tight program, and I am going to begin by making a very brief opening remark. That opening remark really is to say that today we're launching a book of writings and speeches of Sir Alister McIntyre, who needs no introduction. He served here as head of the University of the West Indies. He served in many other capacities in the region, including Secretary General of CARICOM. He served in the United Nations in New York and in Geneva. And his writings constitute a valuable collection. Very important that they be printed together in these two volumes, some 500 pages, because many of them were done before there was digital recording of these writings, and therefore very difficult to get copies of and to read. So I congratulate the University of the West Indies Press for bringing this to us. I'd especially like to commend those who worked on compiling the information. I know how difficult it is to get these out-of-print documents. I had to do some of that for some of my own work, and it was extremely difficult. So we owe a debt of gratitude to Professor Emeritus Andrew Downs, Professor Emeritus Compton Bourne, Dr. Arnold McIntyre, and Rosalie O'Malley. So, with that brief introduction of our purpose today, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you someone who is well known, but there may be a few people who are out of touch of international media who have not heard of Sir Hilary Beckles. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. He's a distinguished academic, international thought leader, United Nations Committee official, global public activist in the fields of social justice, minority empowerment, and reparations. Sir Hilary has served the region not only at the University of West Indies, but he's a director of the Sagicor Financial Corporation. He is chairman of the Caribbean Examination Council. He formerly chaired the University Press. He is chairman of the Caribbean Community Commission on Reparations and Social Justice. He's president of the Universities of the Caribbean, and he is also served as an advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations on a variety of issues. He has received numerous awards from institutions all over the world in recognition of his work, particularly on reparations, but he is also a dynamic leader of a modern university in the Caribbean. Under his leadership, the University of the West Indies is now recognized among the top 1% of universities in Latin America and among the top 1.5% of universities ranked globally by the Times Higher Education Ranking System. He has published extensively, published over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and books, and 20 scholarly books. I think, though that doesn't cover everything that's listed here, it gives you an introduction to Sir Hilary Beckles. We're now going to have a presentation by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. Thank you.
My participation in this book launch gives me tremendous personal pleasure and joy for so many reasons, probably too many to mention here, but I will begin. The subjects, the human subjects. Sir Alister McIntyre. Sir Alister was my mentor. He was for me an inspirational leader. And critically, he was my trusted friend. It is therefore an emotional moment as we celebrate in this format of a double publication the intellectual contributions and legacies of Sir Alister. But there's also the academic subject of Caribbean development, pushing away from the colonial scaffold and moving into sustainable economic development and transformation. His life dedicated to this hegemonic project within the paradigms of regional integration and participation in international trade as an engine, a vehicle of the journey of the Caribbean people. But also too, because it gives us an opportunity as academics to come together to assess a body of scholastic work and public advocacy and policy implementation, all integrated in the consciousness and in the service of one dynamic mind. In many ways, Sir Alister represented the quintessential university man. Strong, robust intellect. An intellect that was committed to research and publishing. Secondly, we are recognizing the supreme advocate of intellectual work and policy. The speeches, the conversations, the policy advising, all of that collective service represented a second pillar of our concept of the ideal academic. And thirdly, the issue of implementing strategy, being a strategic leader of institutions within the context of CARICOM and the UWI, a strategist at the center, implementing a vision for change and development. I have long thought that this body of work, the researcher, the advocate, the strategist, I have long thought that within the context of Caribbean development discourse, a great deal more could have been done and should have been done to give proper and fulsome recognition of Sir Alister's enormous magisterial body of work. But I know that in many ways he represented a bridge between Sir Arthur and the fundamentals, the building up of economic development concepts, and even the very thought, the very notion of an indigenous Caribbean economic development program, and a bridge between Sir Arthur and the great Willie Dimas, and the subsequent post-plantation paradigms in which George Beckford and Norman Gervin and many others participated in fleshing out and modernizing and bringing forward the development discourse at the level of economic structures and relationships. But Sir Alister was a participant in all of that. He was there. He was there in the early years, late 50s, early 60s. He was there with Sir Arthur, and of course brought on board by Willie Dimas, and being an institutional colleague with economists at the Mona campus and across the UWI. But he was there, and because we now have this collection of his work, edited and skillfully structured and narrated, and now available to us, and I wish to give fulsome thanks to our four editorial leaders. Professor Downs, I thank you. Professor Bourne, thank you, and of course the son who has walked in the development field, Dr. McIntyre Arnold, and Rosaline O'Malley, who had worked with Alister closely, putting together his intellectual output in the literary form. Tremendous thanks to the four of you for what you have done, and I fully embrace the editorial strategy which you have deployed, which has been to divide the work into these two broad themes. The first one dealing with issues of integration studies and building out CARICOM, single market, all of these systems of economic and political integration, putting together that what geography had set aside, bringing it together for effective governance and management. And this first volume captures that work. And the second volume, quite correctly, you separated out. I suspect you were given credence to his role within UWI as Vice Chancellor and strategist of our university. And you focused the second volume around higher education, the building out of the human resource, the issues of social capital formation, the advocate in him, the strategist, speaking about the need to invest more in higher education, skills development, and professional training, celebrating and promoting the importance of the human resource to development, and identifying where we in the Caribbean are situated within the hemisphere in terms of that investment and the ranking in terms of where we stand with social capital formation. And thus his insistence that this is the key. This is the key. It's not so much a shortage of capital, it's a shortage of critical skills. It's a shortage of a certain kind of professional mind and mindset that is required entrepreneurially to build out a modernizing economic system, a high productivity, new sector-based economy. This second volume speaks to his brilliance and his visionary concepts around these issues. In fact, these are the issues that have been identified as representing the core of what is the UWI strategic plan, what we call the AAA strategic plan, with the subtitle Rekindling Caribbean Development, because of the importance of greater access. We call it the AAA because it focuses on access, the alignment of the intellectual capital and the social capital with economic systems and structures, and then the agility, which is taking opportunities, being agile and taking every opportunity to participate in new and innovative engagements regionally and globally. So this is a celebratory moment. It speaks of the continued relevance of the work of Sir Alister, the content of these volumes, suggesting that all of us must revisit Sir Alister's work because the content is so relevant to notions of development today. In the post-pandemic world, how do we take our Caribbean economy out of this malaise and push into a new competitive post-COVID ecosystem? Alister's work is relevant to all of this, and I can say critically and finally, the clarity with which Alister has been able to analyze the complexity of Caribbean circumstances, the clarity of thinking. That is what we need now more than ever. And so, to our editors, most profoundly, thank you for the passion you have brought to this scope of work and the commitment you have shown, the resilience and the commitment you have shown is testimony of the fact that you believe in the continued relevance of Sir Alister's intellectual output. You believe that it was valuable at the moment of its delivery, and it continues to be so today and into the future. Thank you for that clarity, and thank you for representing that intellectual position within development at this moment in time. On behalf of the university community, we express our gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, for sharing your insights into the multidimensional contribution of Sir Alister McIntyre. We know that you worked with him very closely for many years. It is now my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the Most Honorable Percival J. Patterson, O.N., O.C.C., O.E.Q.C., former Prime Minister of Jamaica. Popularly known as PJ, Mr. Patterson is a Jamaican, Caribbean, and international statesman who has committed his life to achieving social and economic progress for the people of Jamaica, the Caribbean, and the African diaspora. He has selflessly applied his intellect, legal training, vast political acumen, and international experience to these causes for over 6 decades. Born in April 1935, Mr. Patterson went to Calabar High School. He earned an honors degree in English at the University College of the West Indies, Mona, and then studied law at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Soon after returning to Jamaica, indeed as early as 1958, he was campaigning in the federal elections to support Jamaica remaining in the Federation. And in 1959, he joined the People's National Party. During his early years, he was appointed as a senator in 1969 and elected to the House of Representatives in 1970, and then held several cabinet positions as minister and then as deputy prime minister under the former Prime Minister Michael Manley. Mr. Patterson was elected party president and then Jamaica's 6th prime minister in March 1992. He went on to gain electoral victories in 1993, 97, and 2002, earning the distinction of being the first Jamaican prime minister to win a 3rd term in office. He retired in the year 2006 after serving 14 years as Prime Minister. Mr. Patterson is a dedicated regionalist and a dedicated international statesman. He has worked on CARIFTA, the Caribbean Community. He helped to craft the Grand Anse Declaration. He worked on the CARICOM Single Market. He has chaired for many years the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on External Negotiations, and he has helped in the establishment of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the International Bauxite Association, and the International Seabed Authority. He has continued, even in his retirement, to give service to international causes. He has a long track record in the Group of 15, Group of 77, and the Non-Aligned Movement, as well as Socialist International. In June 2020, he was appointed statesman in residence at the P.J. Patterson, now Institute of Africa-Caribbean Advocacy, based at the University of the West Indies. He has been accorded numerous honors, including Jamaica's Order of the Nation, Queen's Counsel, and the CARICOM Order of the Caribbean Community. He worked on many projects, and over many years with Sir Alister, he's ideally placed to give us his reflections into the life and work of Sir Alister McIntyre.
Professor the Honourable Sir Alister McIntyre was a scholar of distinction and renown in many fields. In my remarks at this launching ceremony of his papers and speeches, it is impossible to cover the entire gamut of his literary legacy. I have therefore decided to focus on one area where my own involvement and collegiate engagement with him enables me to provide a somewhat unique insight. I speak of Sir Alister as the quintessential policymaker whose spectacular contribution in this arena is more than deserving of our special attention, especially at this time of unprecedented turmoil and turbulence in global, hemispheric, regional, and national development. We still peddle the myth that politicians make policy, but continue to ignore the stark reality that they are the heads of institutions, advisors, technical experts, and public servants who design the framework, set the parameters, and identify the options which finally determine the outcomes of policy determination. Sir Alister's life and work placed him firmly in the highest echelons of each category. Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, Assistant Secretary General in the UN Office for International Economic Cooperation, CARICOM Secretary General, Vice Chairman of the West Indian Commission, and Vice Chancellor of our University of the West Indies. In his distinguished, multifaceted career, he has therefore been the head of our principal regional institutions and been a catalytic force of policy formulation not only for the Caribbean, but far beyond. There is no government within the Caribbean which has not been a beneficiary of his towering intellect and vast wealth of experience. Sir Alister was first and foremost a dedicated regionalist who sought to make a meaningful difference to the lives of the Caribbean people, and by extension, to citizens of the developing world. In seeking to instill a sense of confidence in ourselves and fashion our own identity, he observed in Decolonization and Trade Policy in 1965, we ought not to be too dependent on other nations for ideas about ourselves. We were in the dawn of independence when he spoke of the need for our leaders to think out in clear and precise terms what sort of external relationships are compatible with their new constitutional status. He urged the design of a West Indian external trade policy to avoid functional dependency. The formidable team of William Dimas and Alister McIntyre in the transition from CARIFTA to CARICOM convinced the prevailing political leadership that no country can hope to surmount its difficulties by national action alone. Limited resource endowments and tiny domestic markets cannot provide the range of economic opportunities which development and structural transformation demand. That message is still irrefutable today amidst the formidable challenges we face to provide energy and food, to combat ignorance and disease in an era of global warming and health pandemics. When we launched his earlier book, I spoke of the enormous contribution which our technical experts made in the fashioning of the first Lome Convention. The detailed and insightful negotiating brief Sir Alister's team prepared, which was commissioned by the Commonwealth Secretariat, was a tour de force. It set out in lucid and compelling terms the case on which the ACP relied throughout complex and groundbreaking negotiations. In that comprehensive document, we witnessed the mastery of economic science with that brilliance of mind and wide visionary span which are exquisitely combined to yield pragmatic and innovative solutions for the special relationship we developed with the expanded European economic community. Its inclusion in Volume 1 is enough to make that text of incalculable value for future economic negotiations. No one can any longer contend that the present international structure is fit for purpose. The global disequilibrium was perpetuated by the hegemonic practices of the Cold War imperium and ignored the rest of us who belong to the third world and non-aligned. We were simply excluded and forgotten. The war between Russia and Ukraine has dramatically exposed the impotence of the United Nations. The Russia-Ukraine war, which threatens food security and has escalated energy prices on top of the present COVID pandemic, the devastating climate change in existence, all point to the compelling urgency for fundamental changes in the existing international order, both in terms of peace and security, as well as in the struggle for economic survival by developing countries. There is a compelling need for change in a derelict and iniquitous architecture. Why do I mention this here? To draw attention to chapter 2.8 of the book. In 1975, Sir Alister chaired that group of renowned global economists who pointed towards a new international economic order. It is still of timely relevance today. Save for some small tweaking here and there, the analysis and recommendations for global action remain valid today. He wrote, "We are obliged to promote radical and fundamental changes in international economic relations to secure acceptable standards of nutrition, clothing, shelter, public health, medical care, and education for all. Without this, poverty will increase and migratory trends will intensify, as the report eloquently urges. Time for action indeed. The P.J. Patterson Center for African Caribbean Advocacy endorses this urgent call." Despite the constraints of time, Sir Alister would never forgive me were I to fail in highlighting the absolute priority he attached to the development of our human resources for growth and building leadership capacity in the Caribbean. From 1995, he was already writing what both the Davis and Pattison reports have subsequently confirmed. He stated, "A major area of reform is to improve the employability of school leavers from primary and secondary schools. Too high a proportion of students leave those schools without the basic cognitive and numerical skills that are required in the workplace. Complaints are widespread about the large number of students who leave primary schools and even secondary schools as semi-literates." McIntyre accepted that within the confines of available public resources, during periods of modest economic growth, governments are forced to insist on accountability in the education sector and cannot duck the burning issue of proportionality, even as they seek to improve the foundations of learning during early childhood. Let me quote him yet again to remind us at the same time of the imperative to increasing the flow and ensuring the orientation in order to compete in the global marketplace during an era of the knowledge economy. A further broad area for educational reform is to increase the output of graduates from the tertiary system. The Caribbean is quite distinctive with its low tertiary enrollment ratio. The average for the region is just under 5%, compared with a figure of 16 to 17% for middle-income developing countries taken as a whole. This low percentage cannot foster economic growth and development, he writes. He continues, "Further investigation shows a dire situation in terms of the output of technicians and technologists. The annual output of graduates at the industrial craft level is less than 1% of the labor force. These are the persons who constitute the backbone of a modern economy," he concluded. Sir Alister had a profound knowledge of sound economic theory, but what excited him most was its application as a tool of social engineering. He wrote, "We have learned over these past decades that survival and progress are not about bread alone. There's an increasing awareness about the need to protect our ecology and to correct patterns of deviant behaviors such as crime, violence, and drug use that threaten the social fabric of our nations." Sir Alister identified the issue of the environment as part of the wider problem of social sustainability, which affects every country in the world, whether large or small, rich or poor. In commending all the editors for their industry, I make one simple plea. Let us not allow this publication to be yet another collection which we fail to use for productive and pedagogic purposes. Its lasting effect should extend beyond the shelves of our libraries. It must become a textbook for university courses, compulsory reading in all the relevant disciplines, so that in turn our graduates can use the wealth of information these 2 volumes contain for teaching in our secondary, vocational, and professional training institutions. There was a time not too long ago when we knew so much about the metropolitan powers and their people, and so little about ourselves? That was blamed then on a paucity of textbooks about the Caribbean. Happily, that is no longer so. There's an abundance of rich material, but it is yet to receive the critical attention it deserves. For courses on the integration process and research, to reduce our excessive resort to foreign experts, regardless of the guise in which they come. The UWI Press has made a sterling contribution to our intellectual wealth by the publication of these selected papers and speeches of our illustrious Vice Chancellor Emeritus. Allow me to close by a slight adaptation of his parting edict. If the UWI is to serve its full purpose of strengthening society, it should be the vehicle for greater enlightenment, understanding, and cooperation. In our increasingly interdependent world, we must develop an ethos and ethics which is cosmopolitan. That has to be developed so that people of different wealth and income, of different races, cultures, and perceptions can all live together in harmony. As the region's Center for Higher Learning, we are obligated to play a leading role in building that new ethos and ethics within our institutions and between them, and thereby help to further the process of enlightenment in the wider society and the world to which we belong.
On your behalf, I thank the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, former Prime Minister, for his reflections on working with Sir Alister on a range of regional and international issues. It's now my pleasure to give you a slight change of that. I've had much food for thought. This will be an interlude to allow the brain to relax and the spirit to be enhanced. We're very fortunate to have Emily Ruth, who was a singer, dancer, and musician from as early as age 6. Not terribly long from now, but she has since not only been a musician, but she holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from where else but the University of the West Indies at Mona, and a master's degree in applied music psychology from Roehampton University in London. Music is often said to be a vital part of therapy. In fact, they say you should play Mozart to women who are pregnant. So even before birth, children can benefit from this. She has used her music to teach young children not only music, but to teach at the STEP Center, a school for children with multiple disabilities. Among other things, she is the lead cello player for the Philharmonic Orchestra of Jamaica. She composes and arranges music for cello, small ensembles, and choral groups. We're very happy to have you here and look forward to this interlude.
Much. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, back home, I guess. I don't know much about trade and economics, But I hope that this item will remind us how blessed we are as a nation and this region is blessed and how our impact is felt globally. It's always inspiring to hear what those amongst us have done and how they've contributed to different sectors. So hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much for that. And for showing your appreciation so vigorously. You're in for a second treat at the very end of the program. I'm in the invidious and slightly embarrassing position of having to introduce the next speaker. He's somebody I've known all my life, but not necessarily understood. But I will try to do this with some modesty. Richard Bernal, former ambassador, currently professor of practice at Sir Alister and principal research fellow at the P.J. Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy. Formerly Pro-Vice Chancellor, Global Affairs, University of the West Indies. Previously a member of Board of Directors of the Inter-American Development Bank. Before that, Director General, Caribbean Regional Negotiating Machinery. And even before that, long history, Jamaica's ambassador to the United States of America and Organization of American States. Author of many articles and 6 books, one of 50 distinguished graduates of the University of the West Indies. I am going to do a review of the book, and I hope that you will find this useful in guiding you through the gravamen of the 500 pages, which I know you're going to be reading sometime in the future. Thank you. It is a great honor for me to be asked to review this book, which is a selection of the writings and speeches of Sir Alister McIntyre. I feel greatly honored to be asked to do this. My association with Sir Alister started when I was a student in his course of Caribbean Economic Problems in 1969-70 academic year. Later on, I spent 2 years on the Regional Monetary Studies program of the Institute of Social and Economic Research while he was director of that institution. Later on, I was very fortunate to have him as a mentor who always encouraged me and gave me sage advice. I want to record that he was instrumental in encouraging me and helping me to become the Director General of the Caribbean Regional Negotiating Machinery. The book consists of 2 volumes. Volume 1 has 26 chapters covering 377 pages, and Volume 2 includes 21 chapters covering 156 pages. All told, 513 pages of most valuable and insightful analysis and commentary. Sir Alister was writing at a very important time in the history of the Caribbean. It was that critical period from the end of colonialism to the movement to political independence, and then the quest, which is still an ongoing quest for economic independence and development. Sir Alister's purpose, his fundamental concern and objective, was the economic development of the Caribbean people and by extension the people of the developing world. This is the overarching and integrating template for all his writings and his speeches. He was not preoccupied with theory. He was interested in the practical application of economics and in innovation and policy solutions to promote development. Like Karl Marx said, the point is not to understand the world but to change it. His approach could be summed up in the words of George Bernard Shaw. Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that were not in existence and ask why not. What he envisioned, though, was not dreams, but practical possibilities for promoting development. Part of his creativity was obviously his brilliance of mind, but it was also his willingness not to be constrained by conventional thinking. In surveying the material in these 2 volumes, I have extracted what I regard as 10 fundamental insights. Together they constitute a comprehensive and coherent development diagnosis of small developing economies, particularly those in the Caribbean, and the articulation of a raft of policy prescriptions which can promote economic development. His first fundamental insight was the analytic limitations of conventional economics for understanding the development issues of small developing economies such as those in the Caribbean, and of course the fact that the prescriptions derived from conventional economics would not be efficacious in this economic setting. In 1965 he spoke of himself in this way: unorthodox economists, among whom this economist counts himself. He felt that in the Caribbean we ought not to be too dependent on other nations for ideas about ourselves. The answer for him was development economics. But when he was articulating this, was a time when the economics profession did not recognize development economics as a separate discipline. There was only economics. Indeed, he fought a long-running battle with the English economists in the economics department at Mona, where he was the only Caribbean lecturer. He fought to establish a course in Caribbean economics. He was politely but consistently told that there was no such subject. It took the intervention of Sir Arthur Lewis, then Vice Chancellor, himself a pioneer in development economics, to ensure the establishment of a course which was then called Caribbean Economic Problems. This was the compromise. It still did not establish the validity of Caribbean economics, but it was a start to teach Caribbean economic material. I took that course with Sir Alister McIntyre in 1969-70, and the name of the course remained the same, although the content changed when I taught it in the years 1979 to 1985. His second insight relates to the need for new experts for Caribbean economies. Writing as early as 1964, he observed that in the Caribbean, there were high-growth, high-income dependent economies. The dependence was due in large part to the smallness of these economies. Future economic development, he felt, would require new exports to emerge. This was based on the fact that he foresaw that the fortuitous and favorable circumstances for the current primary product exports would not continue. He also realized that the UK and Canada would not continue indefinitely to provide trade preferences. Indeed, they were becoming increasingly reluctant to do so. History, of course, has vindicated his concerns and his outlook. He explained that in changing conditions of the contemporary world economy, major modifications and adjustments are called for in foreign trade, which can become a new engine of growth for the future. This applies, he warned, not only to product competition, but also to the major trading partners which the region engaged. His third insight was the distinction between structural dependence and functional dependence. As early as 1965, long before dependence theory became popular in the 70s in Latin America, he pointed out that structural dependence is related to small size, but it is not an insurmountable barrier to development. It is merely an additional constraint. Where we also have to pay attention to is what he described as functional dependence. This has to be overcome, and therefore both structural and functional dependence have to be tackled simultaneously. His fourth insight was that change would be required to a new trade policy. And this was necessary because the dependence of the Caribbean is most manifest in the trading arrangements with the rest of the world. Caribbean economies were entrenched in the role of primary product exporters in an international division of labor based on and operationalized by colonial trade arrangements. For Sir Alister, the first step towards economic development was to tackle the dialectic of decolonization and trade policy. As early as 1966, he was writing about changes that were necessary in the Canada-West Indies trade arrangements, and that these changes must involve the export of manufactured goods. That was long before the debate of industrialization in the Caribbean began to be undertaken. It, however, follows the insights of Sir Arthur Lewis, who made the export of manufactures an argument some 10 years before. His fifth insight is that restructured external trade arrangements through international negotiations can create new export opportunities. But to realize the potential and get the benefits of these new exports, it would require competitive production of new goods and services. How was this to be done? Done through regional economic integration. Regional integration alleviates some of the disabilities of being small. An enlarged regional market enhances the possibilities for attaining economies of scale and the combination of the variety of resources within a region. The papers of the 1970s are concerned with making a cogent case for regional integration, a process in which he was one of the architects as Secretary General of CARICOM. His sixth insight was that changes in trade from within the region, or for that matter, among developing countries, had to be complemented by changes in the wider entrenched global trade patterns and global trade arrangements. Hence, the struggle for the new international economic order. He said there must be a radical and fundamental change in international economic relations to facilitate more opportunities and a more equitable participation for developing countries. In this regard, he was very engaged in redacting the ACP-EU trade arrangements as codified in the Lomé agreements, and went further to talk about opening up unprecedented trade possibilities and export markets in Latin America. He particularly mentioned the impact of the Panama Canal, and in Africa. He also went as far as to intimate of trade with Asia. Indeed, he not only made these arguments for new trade arrangements, but he led the negotiations in many arenas. And indeed, the CARICOM Dominican Republic Free Trade Agreement is a testimony to his negotiating skills and his pioneering vision. His seventh insight was that the Caribbean did not have the political leverage to force changes, but this could be achieved by negotiations. In negotiations, the Caribbean could overcome the disadvantage of size and strategic importance by the quality of its resources deployed in international negotiations. He was right about this, as the track record of Caribbean negotiators have demonstrated. Initially in the leadership of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group, but in other international negotiations, as manifested in the work of Sir Shridath Ramphal at the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ambassador Don Mills at the United Nations and G77, and Sir Alister himself at UNCTAD and in the United Nations. The region was also well served because the political level complemented the technical expertise, and this was evident in the diplomatic activities of P.J. Patterson, Michael Manley, Owen Arthur, and now Mia Motley. His eighth insight is that the comparative advantage of nations is not static. Indeed, it is dynamic and capable of enhancement, because the key driver is the quality of human resources. Educated brainpower is how the Caribbean can be internationally competitive, regardless of the limitations of size, lack of economies of scale, and a narrow resource base. The ninth insight is that the productivity of human resources in a world of rapidly changing and increasingly complex technology has to be a critical factor. And the critical factor here for the quality of resources is that resources have to be trained to the very highest levels. And this requires a highly educated population, with university level training being of particular importance. His 10th insight is that the University of the West Indies has a special dual role to play in the Caribbean's development. First, as an educational institution, increasing access, strengthening the impact of the university on pre-tertiary levels, and improving the quality of education. Second, and complementary, research and policy advice. He advised the university must lead the way in helping the region to fashion strategies, approaches, and actions. In leading this mission, the university has to change from a regional institution to a global institution. He made the point that in the early phase of the university, we were engaged in Caribbeanizing the university to educate our people. In this new dispensation, it was necessary for us to be outward looking in our thinking. This is what he meant when he gave his speech on opening our windows to the world. The 10 insights I've mentioned constitute a coherent development diagnosis and analysis, and constitutes a logical strategy of development hinged around highly educated human resource development through university education as a critical factor in overcoming the difficulties of small size and as a way of continually refreshing the experts of the region as the region mediates the encounter with the global economy through regional integration. My recollection is that every time I spoke with Sir Alister McIntyre, I learned something. I believe that those who have the opportunity to read the material in these 2 volumes will be recorded with a wealth of analysis and policy prescriptions. For me, the writings and speeches of Sir Alister contained in these 2 volumes constitutes essential reading for people in the Caribbean and in the wider developing world. Thank you, my friends. I hope you'll find that a useful guide to a lot of material. But each one of the chapters and speeches is worth reading in itself. But as a collection, they form a very coherent diagnosis and development strategy. I would now like to continue the program by calling to the podium Nadine Buckley, who is currently the acting general manager of the University of West Indies Press. She brings to this task over 20 years, she must have started very early, over 20 years of work in scholarly publishing. Her work has been recognized by her appointments on the Council of the Association of Learned Professional Society Publishers and other international associations. She is, of course, naturally a graduate of the University of the West Indies and later on the University of Leicester in the UK. Could you please come forward and take the podium?
Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of the editors, I'd like to thank Sir Alister McIntyre and his family for agreeing to undertake this project. When Sir Alister approached us, and that's the editors speaking, in December 2016 to compile and publish his papers, he expressed full support and deep appreciation for the initiative. The editors started work on the project in early 2017 with Sir Alister's full involvement with regards to the selection of papers and speeches. The editors would like to thank him for his outstanding work for the region as reflected in these 2-volume publications for his papers and speeches. We trust that his family is pleased with the final product. Very special thanks must be given to 3 institutions which contributed generously to financing the project, namely the International Development Research Center, IDRC, in Canada, the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, and the Anas Makal Foundation in Trinidad and Tobago. The University of the West Indies Press was instrumental in getting the publication to a stage where it was launched today. We would like to thank all of those staff members who were involved with the production and marketing of the publication, led by the former general manager of the University Press, the late Dr. Joseph Powell, and the current acting general manager, Mrs. Nadine Buckley. The chairpersons of the board of directors of the press, Dr. Luz Longsworth and Professor Denzel Williams, must be specially thanked for advancing the project to its critical stages. We offer sincere thanks to Dr. Angela Ramsey and Mohammed Rafi of Deanta Global, that's one of our partners in producing this book, for offering very valuable assistance with editing, proofreading, and related activities, enhancing the final quality of the product. We further want to thank Vice Chancellor Professor Sir Hilary Beckles for offering his full support for the project and also assisting with the resolution of some challenges encountered along the way. The editors would like to thank Sir Shridath Ramphal for preparing a tribute for the publication, the Most Honorable Professor Sir Kenneth Hall for writing the foreword, Dr. Sheldon Nichols for his endorsement and the review of the publication by Professor the Honorable Richard Bernal for his review. Several institutions provided assistance with this publication with regards to the release of the copyright of articles and monographs, and also the provision of copies of articles to reproduce these 2 volumes. These institutions are duly recognized in the publication. In his dedication for the publication, Sir Alister makes reference to, and I quote, to past and current generations of Caribbean economists who have devoted their attention to the intellectual foundations of Caribbean integration and development. Their ideas and activities have provided the framework for the development of institutions and policies upon which future generations of economists can build. The editors would also like to thank all those who have purchased or will purchase copies of the publication to further advance the idea developed by Sir Alister. We want to specifically mention contributions by particular individuals from the 3 sponsors that we mentioned, and in particular from the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Leon, the president of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Nichols, senior advisor to the president from the Caribbean Development Bank also. 2, from the International Development Research Center, Fernando Pernini, regional director from that institution, and Selva Ballisti. Also want to mention Mrs. Maria Superville Nelson from the Anals Macau Foundation in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Buckland. We now have the presentation of books. We have a number of books that are going to be presented. The first recipient is Mrs. Karen Tyrrell, representing the UWI Library at Mona. Ms. Keisha Myers, National Library of Jamaica, would you please come forward? Ms. Maureen Thompson from the Jamaica Library Service. Miss Tony Marie Cornwall from Sir Alister and the Dock Center, the Norman Gerber Dock Center. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm sure those books will be put to good use. I now have the pleasure of inviting Karen Smith, the acting marketing and sales manager of the University of West Indies Press, to come forward and to give a vote of thanks. Before that, let me just mention that she has many years in the publishing industry, served at the Kingston Book Festival, Marketing Committee, and the Association of University Press annual meetings. Could you please come forward and give the vote of thanks?
Master of Ceremonies, Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Sir Kenneth Hall, Professor Ian Boxill, editors, Professor Andrew Downs, Professor Compton Bourne, Dr. M. Arnold McIntyre, and Miss Rosalie O'Mealy, Lady McIntyre, deans, heads, members of the University Press Board of Directors, members of the university community, members of the Diplomatic Corps, librarians, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The management and staff of the University of the West Indies Press would like to express sincere thanks and appreciation to the speakers, to congratulate our editors on their latest publications, and to acknowledge our partners for their invaluable contribution to this afternoon's event. We thank Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal for so ably chairing today's proceedings. We are very grateful to our partners of this launch, the Office of the Vice Chancellor, the UWI Regional Headquarters Facilities Management Team, DAX Productions, Mr. Dennis Duncan, and UETV for their enormous contribution. Congratulations to Professor Andrew Downs, Professor Compton Bourne, Dr. M. Arnold McIntyre, and Miss Rosalie O'Mealy on the publication of these well-written and researched volumes. They have attracted significant global media attention. Thank you to the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, Ambassador Dr. Richard Bernal, and Emily Ruth for their significant contributions to the program. We thank our valued librarians for attending this afternoon's book launch, and we look forward to your support in promoting Caribbean trade, integration and development, selected papers and speeches of Alister McIntyre, volumes 1 and 2, as a useful reference material in your respective libraries. Caribbean Trade, Integration and Development, selected papers and speeches of Alister McIntyre, volumes 1 and 2, is available at a special 30% launch discount via our website, www.uwipress.com. Enter promotional code 03AM22 at checkout. Conditions apply. In conclusion, let me express our heartfelt appreciation and gratitude to you, our attentive physical and global audience, for being with us today to celebrate with the editors of this superb scholarship. Once again, thank you for attending, and please join us afterwards for some light refreshments. Thank you.
Now that the formalities are over, we can just have some fun. Feel free to join in. I'm sure you know even a little piece of this one.